and welcome back to BHookedCrochet.com. Thank you so much for being with me today. I'm your host Brittany, and in this episode we're going to talk about blocking. Now this is a technique that if you haven't already used it, it's going to completely change the way your projects look. The month of July at BHookedCrochet.com is going to focus in on motifs. So different elements that you put together to make into a bigger, larger project. So blocking is very important when you're working with motifs, and we'll talk about why that is coming right up. So if you've never heard of the term blocking before, you're probably really intrigued, thinking, what on earth does this mean? Well, right now I'm focusing in on my blocking station here in the studio, and I have a really cool project that I have blocked overnight to kind of show you exactly what it is that blocking does and why you should be doing it for your projects as well. But before we get into any further details about this project that I'm working on, I want to first tell you about the 3 different types of blocking that you'll see. And I happen to do all 3, and it really just depends on which project I'm working on. That kind of determines which method I'm going to use. But we're going to cover all 3 in this tutorial. Now, wet blocking is a process where you're pinning everything down, which you can see in the frame here. I have all of these little diamonds pinned down in the position that I want them to stay in, and then I've saturated them with water and I let them dry overnight. That's the first method. The second blocking method is steam blocking, and that's very similar to wet blocking, but you're going to have much quicker results. So you're still going to pin your motifs down just like you see here, but you're going to use your iron on the steam setting in order to release the fibers and kind of get them to stay in that position that you've pinned them down into. That's method number 2. Method number 3 is finger blocking, and you'll typically see me using this method to work with 3D objects or smaller objects, especially flowers. I really do like to finger block flowers. That kind of stretches the yarn out, sets the stitches, and kind of gets it into that even, perfect shape that you want. We'll talk about all 3 of those methods in greater detail. First, let's talk about wet blocking. So first up, we're going to talk about wet blocking. Now I mentioned before that this is sort of the longer way of blocking, but in my opinion, I think it gives you a little bit better results. So what we have here is one of those diamonds that I was working on before, but this one of course has not been blocked. So you can get the idea that it is in the shape of a diamond, but the edges are kind of rounded, and if we were to, say, pull in a few more and put them together, you don't really get the shape or the idea that we're going for. It's much better if you have straight lines to work with. So all you do for wet blocking, now you will need a few supplies. You'll need your, of course, your crochet. You'll need some pins, and I usually just use standard sewing pins. You can buy heavier duty like the T-pins, and those work really great. And you're also going to need a little spray bottle with just some tap water. Doesn't need to be hot or cold or anything like that, just regular tap water will do just fine. And of course you're going to need a blocking board or something to pin it to. Now I really like this Hephaestus Crafts brand blocking board. I've tried several of them. I used to use an athletic flooring tile, which does work really well. The reason why I chose this blocking board and why I highly recommend it is the grid that's printed on there. Now you can buy other brands of blocking board that are about the same size. This is a 12-inch square, so it's a 1-foot square, and it has the locking teeth. So this comes as a set. There are 9 blocks in a set, so you can make a, if you're blocking a project that's really large, such as a scarf or a baby blanket or something like that, you have plenty of boards to accomplish that. The other thing to keep in mind, again, like I said, is this grid that you see on the back. Now, especially when you're working with geometric shapes, that's going to be a really big help for you. So what I like to do is find one of the corners of the blocks. And then I like to work in the corners first. So I'm not really sticking my pin inside the crochet, the stitch, although you can. And then I'm just going to pin it just right down into the corner of that block. Now we'll work on this side here, and you just want to stretch it out so that it gives you the shape that you want. You don't want to stretch it too much. If you stretch really far, see how it'll go that way, but it's stretching out your stitches a lot, and you don't really want to do that. And I know that I'm making this a straight line because I'm following this line here in my grid. Now working down at this corner, again, just stretch it out a little bit. And one more pin should do down in this corner where I really want to stretch that out and just pin it into place. And that's really all there is to it. Generally what I do is I'll pin it down, I'll add in the other motifs, so like I might go ahead and add this diamond as well. And once I get them pinned down, then I'll really start to try and perfect the shape. So I have those two laying about in the exact place that I want them. However, if I needed to tweak it a little bit, I could kind of play around with it. You can even put stitches, you can even put pins along the edges of the stitches here. And that's just going to give it a little more security. Now it's not really needed, but if you have the extra pins, it doesn't hurt to make sure that everything is exactly where you want it. So once you have it in the place that you want, you're going to take your spray bottle and just completely saturate it with water. And I like to press the water in. Now you want to be careful doing this depending on what kind of fiber you're working with. If you have a wool or a natural animal fiber, you want to be really careful about aggravating those fibers because they'll tend to felt on you. So I'm working with 100% acrylic, so I can do this safely without messing anything up. And that's all there is to wet blocking. I say that it is the longer method because now at this point we have to let it air dry. But there are a couple of things that you can do to speed up the process. You can use a blow dryer, but I don't really recommend it. It doesn't really give your project enough time to kind of stretch and relax the stitches so that they stay in that position. Plus you have to watch out for the heat. If you have a natural animal fiber, then you may have some felting issues, or with these acrylics, of course, a melting issue. So you want to just use caution if you are going to use a blow dryer to help kind of dry things. You want to keep it on the lowest setting, and you want to make sure there's enough distance in between your blow dryer and your motif or your square that you have pinned down on your blocking board. So I'm pulling this project back in to show you what happens on the other side of wet blocking. So I wet blocked this last night, saturated it, and now it's fully dry. So it's ready to be unpinned and sewn together or crocheted together. So once you have let your project dry, all you need to do is simply remove the pins, and you'll really be able to tell how much wet blocking does. Now you saw what the diamonds looked like before I wet blocked them. And once I pull all these out, you'll see how they look after they've been wet blocked. And so you'll see that the pieces fit together almost perfectly, and they have a nice defined shape. So you can actually tell that they are diamonds and not just wiggly squares. So there we have it. So you can see how it's so much cleaner, it's so much nicer, and honestly it makes it easier to sew or crochet these together when your edges are perfectly straight. I'm going to pull in one of these white ones just to kind of show you a side-by-side comparison of what wet blocking does. It's a pretty big difference, don't you think? Now let's talk about blocking method number 2, which is steam blocking. And you'll hear my iron in the background. I've got it fired up and ready to go. You basically want to put your iron on, you don't want to put it on the hottest setting. I have mine on the step below the hottest setting. So while that's warming up, let's go ahead and pin down this other little diamond. So I'm going to do that the same way as I did previously. Okay, now that our block is ready to go, let's demonstrate how you do the steam blocking. So it's good to have the pins. They sort of serve as a guide. Now the one thing you really want to be careful of is you do not want to touch your iron to your crochet. In my case, where I'm using 100% acrylics, it's going to melt and it's going to make a big huge mess, and we don't want that. If you're working with animal fibers, they are pretty sensitive to extreme heat, especially if you were to just touch the iron to them. Then you could have some felting, or you could have any other variety of issues. So you want to make sure you don't touch your iron to your crochet. So you're just simply going to hold your iron directly above and then just push the steam button. And once you've given your block or your project a good steam, you want to give it some time to allow it to completely cool before you unpin it. So this timing where the fibers are really warm, they've got some steam in there, that's what's doing the job. It's relaxing the stitches, and then once it cools down and the little bit of steam dries off, it's going to lock those stitches in place exactly where you've pinned them. So let's take a quick break. We'll allow this to dry, and then we'll see the results. So while our block is cooling from where we just did the steam demonstration, let's quickly talk about finger blocking, the third method of blocking, because it is the most simple and quick and easy to do. So what I have here is a spiral crochet flower. If you're interested in this pattern, it's a free pattern over on my website. Just go to bhookedcrochet.com/spiral flower. You can have access to this tutorial and the free pattern. So one of the things you'll notice is when you're crocheting this flower is the little points have a tendency to curl up. Sometimes that looks pretty cool if you're trying to go for this 3D effect. But for the purpose of our demonstration, I want them to lay flat. So you might hear me say, or hear me talk about it in a pattern where I tell you to finger block. And this is especially true for flowers because you can't really pin them down. Now this one we could pin down because it is a flat flower. But there are flowers that are 3D where we can't pin them down, so we have to finger block them in order to get them to stay in the shape that we want. So finger blocking is simply just as it sounds, just grabbing the point where we want it to lay flat and stretching it. So I'm kind of holding down here, making sure that I'm just stretching the stitch out. And you can kind of stretch them out this way as well. And that's really all there is to finger blocking. So you see that just that little extra step that we did sort of made it into the proper shape. Now one thing about finger blocking is it's not as permanent as the wet blocking or the steam blocking. So if you were to, toss this in a bag or a drawer or something like that, it is going to curl back up. So that is one of the fallbacks to the finger blocking. However, there is a time and a place, and you can use it at your discretion. So now you know how to do it, and you can apply it for those 3D projects that you have coming up in the future. So jumping back again to our steam block square, it's completely cooled down, and so I'm going to remove the pins just to demonstrate how well this worked. Okay, so this was completely, it was kind of curled up. Actually, this is one of the blocks that had not, this square hasn't been blocked at all. It hasn't been wet blocked or steam blocked. And this is what this one looked like. So you can see how quickly you can get results with steam blocking. So now that we've talked about all 3 methods of blocking, now I want to take the time to brainstorm and see how you can use this technique in order to improve your projects and the items that you might be putting in your Etsy shop, for example. So although July is motif month at B.Hooked Crochet, blocking isn't just for motifs. It's actually really great for any object that's flat. So you'll also find me wet blocking or steam blocking scarves, for example. Also some clothing elements where once you stretch them out, lay them flat, the sleeves or the front panel or something along those lines. I'll especially block any type of component that's going to go into an afghan. Anything that I'm going to sew together is really great for blocking. So when you want to have clean edges, clean lines, you want to block. That's one of the most important things you can do, and it's really one of the easiest. I've been blocking my projects for a number of years now, and I've tried just about every product on the market for blocking your crochet or even your knitting if there are some knitters out there. What I have found works best for me is these Hephaestus Crafts blocking boards. Now, as I mentioned before, the grid is really, really great. And when you tile these together, when you lock them in together, the grid matches. So no matter how big your project is, you're going to have a continuous grid, so you always make sure that you're blocking your project in the shape that you actually want it to stay in. So hands down, these blocking boards are my favorite out of all the ones that I've used. If you're interested in getting some for yourself, head over to bhookedcrochet.com/blocking. And that is an affiliate link. If you do decide to purchase these blocking boards online, I will get a small commission, and if you do so, I thank you very much. If you'd like a full recap of everything you've seen here in this blocking tutorial, head on over to bhookedcrochet.com/blockyourproject. That's a quick link that's going to take you directly to the post that talks about and covers everything that you've seen here, from the products that I use to the 3 different methods and what projects each of those 3 methods might be good for. On behalf of bhookedcrochet.com, I do thank you so much for being here today, spending some time with me, and learning about this really cool technique. I'd love to hear how it's worked for you, so if you could leave a comment below, let me know what you think about blocking. And stay tuned for the next episode at bhookedcrochet.com.